So, how did a machine from way back in the 1400s manage to spark revolutions and literally build the modern world? It's a wild thought, right? Well, let's dive in and find out. That machine was, you guessed it, the printing press. And today, we're going to break down how this one single invention completely upended the flow of information. And in doing so, well, it changed absolutely everything. Okay, so to really get the impact of this, you have to picture a world without print. A world where information could only move as fast as someone could write it by hand. A world where words were, and this is literal, chained up. And the difference is just, it's night and day. Before print, we were living in what's called a manuscript culture. Think about it. Every single book was copied by hand. By hand. Often on this super expensive animal skin called vellum. So you can imagine it was incredibly slow, ridiculously expensive, and the books themselves were really fragile. And because the church and royalty controlled who got them, knowledge wasn't for everyone. It was a total luxury item. Now, the basic idea of printing wasn't pulled out of thin air. You had woodblock printing, where you carve a whole page onto a block of wood, which had been around in China since the 6th century. It even made its way to Europe thanks to Marco Polo. But it was still a really slow process, mostly used for simple stuff like playing cards or religious pictures. The world was ready for a major upgrade. The stage was set for a real leap forward. And that massive breakthrough, it finally came in the 1430s in Germany, all thanks to one guy, Johann Gutenberg. And this, right here, is where the story really kicks into high gear. You see, Gutenberg's genius wasn't that he invented something totally new from scratch. Nope, it was that he combined a bunch of existing technologies in a brilliant new way. He was a master goldsmith, so he knew all about working with metal. He created these durable, individual metal letters. This is the famous movable type. Then he'd arrange the letters into words, lock them in a frame, ink them up, and use a modified olive press to stamp them onto paper, again and again and again. That simple, clever combination, that was the birth of modern printing. So what was the first major book he printed? The Bible, of course. Now, I know what you're thinking. 3 years to make 180 copies, that sounds crazy slow, but you have to put it in perspective. A single scribe might take a whole lifetime just to make one copy. Compared to that, this was lightning fast. It was, for the first time ever, mass production for ideas. And the impact was just immediate and explosive. Get this, within just 50 years of Gutenberg's press, so by the year 1500, there were an estimated 20 million printed books floating around Europe. 20 million. The floodgates of information had just been blown wide open. And it didn't even slow down. By the next century, by 1600, that number jumped tenfold. We're talking 200 million copies. This wasn't just a small change. This was a full-blown information revolution. It literally transformed Europe from a culture that mostly listened to a culture that could read for itself. So with all this information suddenly flowing so freely, you just knew it was going to start challenging the powerful institutions of the day. And who was first in the line of fire? The Roman Catholic Church. Okay, so fast forward to 1517. A German monk, Martin Luther, writes his famous 95 Theses, basically a list of criticisms against the church. Now, before the printing press, his ideas probably would have just stayed in his little town. But instead, his writings were printed, copied, and distributed in huge numbers. His ideas just spread like wildfire all across Europe, kicking off the Protestant Reformation. And Luther himself? Oh, he knew exactly how crucial this new tech was. He actually called printing the ultimate gift of God and the greatest one. For him, it was like a tool sent from heaven to get his message directly into the hands of the people, bypassing the old gatekeepers. But hey, not everyone was celebrating. A famous scholar at the time, Erasmus, was actually pretty worried. He saw this unfiltered flood of information, this glut of books, as he called it, and thought it was hurting real scholarship. He was afraid printers were just filling the world with seditious and ignorant books. It's kind of like the 16th century version of worrying about misinformation online, right? He thought it would undermine authority and just create chaos. And of course, the establishment fought back. The church was seriously troubled by all these new interpretations and direct challenges to its power. So what did they do? In 1558, they created the Index of Prohibited Books. This was basically a massive blacklist, a huge attempt to censor ideas they didn't like and wrestle back control over this new media landscape. All right, so after shaking the foundations of religion, what was next?
Politics, of course. Print started to give a powerful new voice to people who were beginning to question the absolute power of kings and queens.
I love this quote from an 18th century French writer. It just captures the feeling of the time so perfectly. Tremble, therefore, tyrants of the world. I mean, wow. People were really starting to believe that the printing press was this unstoppable force for progress, something that would eventually just wipe out tyranny. In fact, a lot of historians argue that this whole print culture is what made the French Revolution possible. So how did it do that? Well, for one, it spread the ideas of Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Rousseau, who were all about reason over blind tradition. It also created this new space for public debate, where ordinary people felt like they could and should question everything. And you had all this underground stuff, pamphlets and even cartoons, making fun of the monarchy, which slowly chipped away at their authority. But this story isn't just about Europe, not at all. The printing press had a huge and really complex impact all across the globe, and its role in colonial India is a really fascinating case study. In 19th century India, print was a classic double-edged sword. On one hand, you had the British colonial government and missionaries using it as a tool of control, printing tracts to spread Christianity and newspapers that basically celebrated British rule. But on the other hand, Indian reformers and nationalists grabbed that same exact technology. They used it to debate intense social issues, and they published their own newspapers to criticize the British and to start building a sense of a shared national Indian identity. And you can probably guess what happened next. Just like the church in Europe, the colonial authorities got scared of this rising native press. So, in 1878, they passed something called the Vernacular Press Act. It gave them huge powers to censor and shut down any non-English newspapers that were critical of their rule. It's the same story all over again, right? The people in power trying to control the narrative. But that push for freedom was just too strong to be silenced. Mahatma Gandhi summed it up perfectly in 1922. He said the fight for Swaraj, for self-rule, was, before anything else, a fight for freedom of the press. The battle over information was the battle for independence. Simple as that. So from Gutenberg's very first Bible all the way to the fight for Indian independence, the printing press completely reshaped our world. It democratized information, it challenged authority, and it gave a voice to people who never had one before. And all that leaves us with one last big question to think about. What modern technology is doing the exact same thing today?